Hey, Zach, are you ready for BBM for the iPhone?
I've been refreshing the App Store since it was announced to see if it's out yet.
Yeah, well, there was an article talking about how literally every other manufacturer, including Microsoft, Google, they all have applications on the App Store, but there's no Apple products on or software on other places.
Right, with the exception of maybe iTunes for Windows.
Yeah, which we found out isn't even coming to Windows 8.
Right. Well, it isn't being optimized for Windows 8 running on not Intel or whatever.
The ARM processor, yeah.
Yeah. No
Yeah.
love for ARM.
Well,
No, I don't know. I mean, like BlackBerry Messenger, isn't that what it stands for? Was
Yeah.
the only thing that kept people on the, well, I don't know if it did anymore, but kept people on the platform, aside from maybe QWERTY keyboards. But I suppose you could carry around a physical keyboard with your iPhone and
Yeah.
hook it up.
Why did BlackBerry go and create this messenger for the iPhone? I feel like it's their way of kind of giving up. I know that they're moving to the enterprise. They're moving to be more of like a back-end service, a service where they're providing all of the BlackBerry services but don't really require the hardware. But is that giving up, or is that just them kind of saying we're doing our own little pivot?
I think it's throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks.
They're Yahoo, where Yahoo is just purchasing everything right now,
including possibly Tumblr. We'll find out.
Yeah.
One day.
Right.
No, I mean my first guess honestly was they're gonna just be a software company, because that was the only thing that restricted that wanted you to buy the hardware, BlackBerry hardware. So if that's open, and that was the only thing nice about the software, I guess. I don't know. I never used it when it was popular. Then they're just gonna like monetize their software services and make those.
Well, who is a software strategy working for? So it's working, I suppose, for Google with Android. They're doing just a little okay. But when it comes to like Windows Phone, it's interesting to see how that is another software only strategy, but it's not doing so hot. So it's going to be a hit or miss kind of thing, where they're either going to take off like Android, and then we'll have three people going at it, or it's just going to be a flop, as we've kind of seen lately, where it's just going to be the same thing like Windows Phone.
Yeah, there's only so much of the pie to go around, and I think BlackBerry is going to be left out of that pie going forward. Their piece of the pie has been shrinking exponentially over the past 10 years, and I don't know who they're going for. I don't know that. I mean, it's bold to want to try to break into that space. You wouldn't see. It's hard to imagine a third company popping up in between Android and Apple, and taking over that space and owning that space. But nobody thinks it's going to be BlackBerry.
Well, I saw a graph from an analyst, one of those wonderful analysts. It was from last year, and they said that Windows Phone was going to start taking about 35% of the market, and iOS was just going to completely drop out to about 5%. And they were saying that was going to happen by 2015. Now, clearly, that's definitely still nowhere near what's actually happening in the market. We have no signs of that happening. So it's funny to see kind of these massive predictions of what's going to happen in the market when they're just completely incorrect.
What I'd like to see analysts do is analyze how often analysts are correct. I mean, seriously.
We have TrackCore now. Have you heard of that? Let me see if I can make sure I get the right website. It's TRACOUR.com. And Mark, of course, is up at the top for the leaderboard in terms of his accuracy with rumors.
Right.
And of course, this is an analyst, but it's more rumors and everything else like that. But it's really funny to see Mark's 98% accuracy with the 26 rumors that he has on the website so far. So that's definitely, and as more rumors become true at WWDC, it'll be kind of cool to see how this website starts to grow with all of the rumors that are flying around at all times.
That's interesting to bring up. I don't want to throw stones in a glass house, but I would think that if you're an analyst, you'd have a better track record than reporting on restricted products like Mark does. I mean that's your living, that's your income, that's like what you specialize in, looking at numbers and predictions and that kind of thing. So it's no secret that analysts generally analysts. I guess the loud ones get the most, make the headlines, and maybe the great ones are tucked under the carpet. They don't make the headlines. Kind of.
Well, I think the crazier the prediction, the more likely it's going to get the headlines.
Right. It begs the question: how much fuel does that put in the car before you run it out and you break down?
Oh, they've been going on for quite some time. But to say hello to our listeners, this is the 9to5Mac Happy Hours. It's a special edition where it's just me, Scott, and we got Zach Hall as well on the podcast here today. Mark and Seth are traveling back from Google I/O. There were a lot of cool news pieces that came out from that conference this week. So we can kind of touch upon them and talk about how they affect or will not affect Apple, and how we're about, 2.5 weeks now until WWDC?
Yeah, last week I filled in for you as host, and kind of nervously. and we made a lot of predictions about Google I/O, and I think some of our listeners got like a Google overdose from listening to the 9to5Mac podcast. I don't want to dive too much into that this week. But last week we made a lot of predictions about what we expected, and we were surprised that there wasn't any hardware being released, just software updates, and not even a new version of Android, but just software updates.
That's the main thing. Where there's no new Android. Of course, there's a lot of stuff that they threw up on top of it, but there was no massive explosion of like a new point update or just a completely new update.
And it was 3 hours long. So I mean, if you would have told anybody a week ago that there was going to be a 3 hour keynote and no new hardware except for the Samsung Galaxy S running pure Android, which is funny because Google called it Google's version of Android, which they make, and no new software updates for Android, nobody would have believed you. So that's something else.
Well, here's the deal. I've been thinking about WWDC, and there's a list online called Everything Apple Needs to Introduce at WWDC to Appease the Internet. And it's over 50 points long, and I think some of them are crap just to make the list as long as it can be. But how I see it, there's simply one small thing, or not small, one important thing that will make it a make or break difference for Apple. They can add little things like putting iBooks on the Mac, which is really important to me still, but it's not that massive. They could add a new Mac Pro, which is cool, but the masses won't find it special. What I see is that Apple needs to move beyond the iOS, iPhone, iPad, right, and the Mac, but they need to bring another platform, either that being the Apple TV or the Watch. Now, if they don't really move forward past that, I think that the past 6 months of them being quiet was just ridiculous. It went nowhere. So if they're not bringing a new platform, if they're not expanding to the Apple TV as they need to, or if they're not introducing some sort of wearable technology, then it's a big loss for me. It's something where they aren't really using their time as they should be, or they're just not having a complete strategy. They're becoming, in some sense, myopic if they're just sticking with the devices that they have right now.
Okay, so what you're saying is that your list is much shorter, that everything Apple needs to introduce at WWDC to appease Scott is only 2 bullet points instead of 50. And
it's just one. They need a new device or a new platform.
Maybe, I don't know. There's so much time has passed by since the last software update. There wasn't even like a huge 6.1 update that brought like crazy new features to iOS or OS 10. So what I really want, I mean, I would be happy with that. I would be happy with with the iWatch or an Apple TV update, like a big one.
Hmm.
But somebody on this list, like for an update to iMessage that makes it reliable, those are the kind of things that I want. That are like, if Apple actually did that, it isn't something that you can brag about proudly, but if they do that, people will be happy, and all of this like pent up frustration can be let out. Let's see what else. Multiple people on FaceTime calls. I mean, those things show that Apple is not only innovative but can keep up with the pace that Google's doing. I mean, they updated Hangouts over last week. On iOS, you can now drop in multiple people on a Hangout. You can leave and come back any time. The kind of things that we were talking about before, you can do that now, and it's almost shameful. It isn't shameful, but it's curious that Google's innovating on iOS faster than Apple is.
Well, it seems like they're doing stuff. Like, it feels like they're actually moving ahead and actually creating new software, creating new technology, trying out Google Glass. They're trying out all of these new technologies, and it might be that they are going through and sometimes getting rid of technologies like Google Reader.
Right.
But for the most part, they're going out there and just trying out new stuff all the time. But when it comes to, like, I guess it's just been this 6-month period that really has kind of changed how I think of where Apple is in general, and I think so many other people are in the same boat, where Apple just hasn't moved. And even though, you know, I can get accused of being an Apple fanboy from my Android friends, I think it's a little dissatisfying right now. Like, I wouldn't be able to switch to Android just because iMessage makes so much sense. Integration with iTunes makes so much sense. I have tons of applications as it is. I still, whenever I use somebody else's phone, an Android phone, it like makes me cringe that people still have like task killers and all that other crap.
Right.
So there's still the massive benefits of iOS and all of Apple's ecosystem that make it so that I want to stay. But it's just it feels like I'm in an environment that it's perfect, but it's not moving. So it's like a society that everything is going well, but there's no like GDP increase. Like, everything's just staying the same. You get what I mean?
Yeah, I have another analogy to make that I think kind of explains the way a lot of, you know, us Apple fans are feeling right now. Let's take a look at how Netflix puts out an original series. So with their new series House of Cards that they own entirely, or even Arrested Development, the future series that they're gonna own new season of, they put out every episode at one time, and then you can sit and like binge watch it, and then it's done. And that may take like a weekend, and then it's over with. You're not talking about it anymore. That's kind of the way, you know, versus putting out a new episode every week, and it's something like that you talk about at the water cooler, you know, with your friends throughout the few months that a show is released. It's kind of what Apple's doing, is that like they put out everything at one time, and it was like for that month was huge. But there's so much time that's gone by that we're all frustrated now, and we're like, when's season 2 come out? We want to, you know, when it would be nice if they would take a look at this list, you know, and say, okay, let's every month or every 6 weeks commit to like a you know, a new feature or something.
Well, then they become Facebook, and their keynotes are very boring. But how I see it,
it would if we had like more frequent, like, you don't have to. Some of the things in iOS updates, like they say over 200 features, some of those things are not major, are not worthy of like talking about at a keynote, which is why
I remember that's actually my top tweet where I said all 200 of the new features are actually 200 new emoji.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
so
because I see what you're saying about coming out with tons of new crap at once. Everyone loves it, and then it dies out.
Yeah.
And they kind of did that, even though they did drag it over, you know, a period of a few months to do all these keynotes with the new iPad and all the other iPad Mini and everything else that they did. But honestly, look at Google now. How they have been able to...
Wait, do you mean Google right now, or the product Google Now?
Sorry, the product called Google Now, that is what some consider a Siri competitor. It's their approach to voice commands, or some sort of an assistant in some manner. So they have not only been able to improve the product far beyond what Siri offers, But as well, then they went, oh, well, let's take this awesome product and let's make it on iOS as well. Why not? And so last year, and I've talked about this way too many times during this podcast, Apple introduced what they called some, they said some updates to Siri. And what did those include? Do you remember?
Let's see. Sports.
Uh-huh.
Movie tickets.
Uh-huh.
Movie reviews.
Uh-huh.
And
that's it.
That's it.
Sports and movies. Sports and movies. Sports and movies. Sports and movies. That's all we got after one whole year.
1 year.
1 year. Okay? And
arguably less reliable.
Yeah. But I just want to see a timeline. Like, we should create a timeline of all of the things that Google does, right? And even just going down to just the product of Google Now, right? And compare that to Siri. And you'll see how there's been just massive, massive updates to Google Now. And Siri's just like, hey, guys, I can tell jokes. And, I can sometimes give you directions. I do like the directions. But, like, still, I don't get it. I'm an angry. What am I? What should we name me? Am I the
angry Apple fanboy?
Yeah. I'm the angry fanboy. Call me the AAF, the double AF.
Yeah, there was an interesting post on Daring Fireball this week that says it's Google versus the title, and it's Larry Page on stage at I/O. And Larry Page talked about how he feels like the story of Google is always Google versus some other company, and he's upset about that. And then John Gruber goes on to say that it's like that because Google makes it that way. They go into to a category like search, and they copy it, but then they do it better, and then they're the de facto of that category. And I had never thought of that before. I mean, I used to use Ask Jeeves whenever I was, in second grade or whatever. But it didn't occur to me though that Google wasn't the first to do search because they're the best to do search because they were first, and so that concerns me because they're doing Siri much better than Apple is doing Siri right now. I mean, it's on the desktop. It's coming to the desktop. They added new features on Wednesday. They added sports. They added they added lots of things. I think it can already do more with location than Siri. Their rate of innovation is impressive.
It's disappointing.
Fanboys, so.
It's disappointing because there's the comparison of when Apple was going against Microsoft in the beginning of the computer, just the beginning of the computer era,
right?
At least with a microprocessor, right? And so Apple, even though it had such an awesome product, they had certain flaws that made it so Microsoft could get ahead. And here we are today where Microsoft has 90% of the market and Apple is struggling to, of course, have their 10% of the market. Now, one can argue that, of course, Apple is still making massive amounts from their Macs. Other manufacturers don't make as much money with, especially with their margins, with the devices they make. So in some sense, if Apple were to lose all of their market share and go down to the same 10% that they have in the personal computer area, mm-hmm. the market, then it's not so bad because they'd still be making tons and tons of money just as they do right now. But at the same time, they had such a huge market share and it was growing and it was doing really, really well for themselves. And if they just kept with their pace of innovation, and I know that we've talked about this before where when the original iPhone came out, they were 5 years ahead, right? That's what they said. And then in 2012, that seems like the year that they fell behind. So it seems like, after 5 years, they hadn't even gotten themselves another year ahead. They were still, 5 years ahead from back in 2007. So it's just frustrating because you want Apple to succeed. You want them to be the market leader. And the problem I see as well is that Windows has really been able to keep that stronghold on their market share because they got into enterprise and they were able to make it so companies pretty much relied on their systems. Now, for Apple, the iPad, of course, is in tons and tons of Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, whatever else it is. But a lot of the times, it's not like they provide as well the back-end service or a lot of proprietary software that couldn't easily be moved to another operating system. So it seems like they've really, when they were at the peak of their time, if I can even say that it's over, then that's when they didn't take advantage of it. They didn't go through and make it so that they were undefeatable. They didn't make it so anybody could not compete with them. So that's where I see the biggest issue. And now, of course, this can all change in 2.5 weeks with WWDC. They can make it so that they are showing that they are innovating, that they are going into the TV market and really revolutionizing there, that they are thinking about wearable computing in some sense, that they are thinking about new ways of approaching iOS and making it so that your phone is a really powerful tool. Or 9to5Mac, we've also mentioned how there's a lot of power features that are coming to the Mac. And so we can see that as well, where Apple's not saying, okay, we're focusing more on the consumer. They can finally say we're focusing on everyone. We're focusing on our developers with, a new Xcode, whatever else it is. Truthfully, they just need to say we're alive. We're kicking. We aren't allowing Google to just take over everything that we're trying.
Right. A lot of that's something. I mean, you mentioned Xcode. On during Google I/O, a lot of people were saying, probably exaggeratingly, that it makes Apple look stale. And I mean, you can say that, but I think that tone may be a little bit too sharp from reality. So it wouldn't take we make it sound like it's a huge like they're so far behind, but in reality, I mean, for us, we haven't switched to Android. We haven't switched to exclusively using Google products, so they're still ahead to us. They're just not where we want them to be. The pace isn't there, and in reality, it wouldn't take very much for them to get ahead. Like we laugh about this list of 50 things, and it's kind of silly, but if you took 10 of those things, which they probably will, then we're probably going to be happy, and I think everyone's tone will probably change after.
Well, yeah, I think my current attitude could quickly change if they just. I think this is going to be probably, for me, the most important keynote since 2007, since the original iPhone.
Right.
And it's either going to be important in a good sense, that they're going to prove themselves, that they're going to prove that there is innovation, that they are coming out with new cool things that they didn't spend the past 6 months doing nothing.
Right.
Or they're going to be, as they like to say, resting on their laurels and doing nothing. And even, just putting a little bit of polish on top of their current products, but not actually innovating in any way. So
yeah, if they do come out at WWDC and all it is a new polish, then we're immediately going to go into the mode of iOS 8. That's going to be the overhaul, and our expectations are going to be even further from what's like possible. So I think it's like Apple would be doing themselves a favor if they do a little bit more than last year and the year before. If they treat it like, not like a TikTok year, or even imagine that approach, but if they do, like if we don't do something big this year, the next year is going to be even more unreasonable and continuing forward. It's all about managing expectations. And right now, people expect a lot because Apple has created that expectation, from the launch of the iPhone, and then in 2010 with the launch of the iPad. There were so many easy things though in 2007 to fix, like 2G on the iPhone, and they've continued that pace. I mean, now we have LTE on our iPads and iPhones, so it's easy to take things for granted. But I mean, if someone can compile a list of 50 things and say these things would make us happy, somebody at Apple needs to be listening, and I hope that they are, and I imagine that they are. Time will tell. We'll see.
It's tough because there's been high expectation keynotes before, and that usually results in their stock price shooting down after.
Yeah, historically.
Yeah. So it's tough. It's tough to say what's going to happen. It's tough to say if they're really going to even get close to the expectations that we all have.
Right. Something that happened with the keynote, Steve Jobs' last keynote when iOS 5 came out. A lot of rumors. I mean, like I think Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal picked it up that there wasn't going to be a new iPhone that year. You know, those are not accidental leaks. You know, I mean, I think it's safe to assume that those leaks come from Apple. That's one way to manage the story. Is to the press, and so nobody went into WWDC that year expecting a new iPhone. This year, we're all going into WWDC expecting at least a UI overhaul and to be impressed with features. Just before Google I/O, Google was saying, "Don't expect new hardware. This is going to be a software event. This is going to be for our developers," and that's exactly what it was. So I mean, I think because we're so close to WWDC and we haven't heard leaks from Apple saying, you know, it's just going to be a refinement year. It's not going to be like a UI overhaul. Don't expect to get the gloss off of your notifications. You know, some of your icons. I think it's safe to assume that we're going to see that. We don't expect like new iPhones and iPads. We expect new Macs. We know that there's a Made in America Mac line coming out this year. We don't know when. But I think we've got a good handle on what to expect from WWDC this year, as to not be totally disappointed and left out in the cold. But we just have some seriously high expectations because of last year and the year before, software wise. You know, there's so many problems with like just like the UI of the App Store. And that's where it gets tricky because, I mean, Apple bought Chomp and they changed the UI of the App Store. The only thing, though, it wasn't changed for the best. It was just like a different way of presenting problems. So I mean, with that point, it does concern me a little bit that we will see some changes this year, but we may not like the changes. They may just be a new skin on the same problems.
Yeah, it's really funny that with iTunes 11.0.3 that came out, what was it, yesterday, right?
Yesterday.
Or 2 days ago? Yeah.
Yesterday.
Well, there's, with the new mini player, there's the hint at the flat design, right? Where a lot of people were saying how the new mini player has kind of a hinting at the flat design, and that's what we can expect from the new iOS. And possibly even it would be kind of interesting if we get rid of a new design and move that over to the Mac as well. It would be interesting if everybody or every operating system takes in that new flat design. But it's everyone is obviously eager for change,
right?
And just as you said, who knows if it's not going to be good.
Right. Well, I mean, look at that mini player. They changed it. Now you can view artwork that way. But there was something different that they changed about the way iTunes behaves. Before, in the like in the masthead, you could click on the artwork and it was huge. It would take up like your whole screen if you wanted it to. But now you can't make the artwork much bigger than the palm of your hand, which is a whole lot smaller than what it used to be. So that's changed for whatever reason, but it isn't changed that's better in my opinion. So I mean, I guess Apple does have a history of changing things and it just being different but not better. So it shouldn't be outside of my expectations that we see some changes at WWDC, changes to OS 10 and iOS that are different but not better. And I mean, anytime you change something, just naturally you're going to have new problems with that change. And you try to appease the most amount of people, I suppose, or present the best solution that Apple thinks is right. But it may cause new problems, I guess.
Well, the last thing we'll mention is that this week Apple they reached 50 billion app downloads on the iOS or the iTunes App Store.
Right.
And it's interesting how they just announced that right where Google announced that, wasn't it 40 billion that they're at? 40 billion app downloads?
48 billion, which
yeah, you're right.
I wouldn't have. All of this is like way too coincidental, but you can't make this stuff up. Like the 50 billion apps being right before Google I/O, and then the app is downloaded a few hours after IO ends. Like you can't script that. That I guess you could, but if
Yeah.
Apple is being honest, you can't lie about that kind of thing. And so that's crazy coincidental that right after IO is ends, then that you've got a press release to go out that the 50 billionth app was downloaded.
Hmm.
But also, it presents its own problems because I wouldn't have known the significance of 48 billion apps for Android if I didn't know because of the front page of Apple.com that Apple was at 50 billion. So, I mean, like everything presents its own problems, I guess.
Well, at the same time, I mean, there are obviously a lot more Android devices than iOS devices, so it shows that people are downloading more on iOS devices per device.
That is true, and also I think you and I both know anyone that listens to this podcast probably prefers apps on iOS over apps on Android, which is why
Oh,
we
and
all use
they'll pay
iPhones.
for them too.
And they'll pay for it. Just the name itself, Google Play Store, doesn't make me want to bring up my wallet. Something about the App Store feels like almost tangible, and I feel like if I buy it, I own it, and I can always go back and re-download it, and I know where it is. I'm not sure if it's with the carrier or Google or my phone, like Samsung. I know it's Apple. It's the App Store. It's gonna be there for years and years and years. If I accidentally delete it, I know where to go get it again. I I don't. I mean, I'm curious about Android, about owning an Android part time and just trying it out so that I know what I'm talking about when I discuss Android. But I still wouldn't feel like my money was going very far if I would be reluctant to buy apps on Android, even if it's the same app. I mean, some of Android feels janky, to be honest, and so I wouldn't know if the app is going to feel janky, not at the fault of the developer, but because of the platform. Another thing, apps going iOS first. I mean, you got Vine, which is a startup that Twitter bought before it was even released, and Vine went iOS first, and they haven't gone Android yet, and it's been weeks. Popular game Fish Out of Water has gone iOS first. It's not on Android. The game Dots, Letterpress, all of these games that you can only play with your friends, social games on iOS. You don't see them on Android. So I think when you bring up your point, which was downloads per device or per user versus overall downloads, then it makes Apple look a whole lot better. And when you look a little deeper than just the numbers, you look at like what apps Android has versus what apps Apple has exclusively. It really shows the quality of iOS and the opportunities of Google and Android in the Play Store, which maybe they addressed some of recently. I don't know. Will only time will tell what Google I/O and its changes, how it will affect what we're talking about now. Um, but it's just no comparison for me right now. I mean, it's no
Yeah.
question.
Okay. Well, with that, we have 7 days of awesome rumors coming up here. So let's hold off until next week's happy hour. And we'll be back having it live through our Hangout next week. But until then, thank you for joining us. And I hope you enjoy the podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add in the here, if you're listening, you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. You can rate the podcast if you like it. If you don't like it, you can go to 9to5cast.com and leave your feedback, and I'll respond to you personally. Also, next week, I'm sure we'll be talking about Tim Cook going to Washington. He'll be talking with Congress about how Apple handles its finances and how it handles its tax bill. So a little plug for something I'm sure we'll be talking about next week. Can't wait.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. All right. Thank you much.
Cool. See you next week, Scott.